Have you felt the crushing weight of unanswered prayers despite faithfully reciting the Holy Rosary day after day? You grasp your beads, mouth the words, yet something invisible stands between you and the torrent of graces Padre Pio promised would flow to those who properly honor Our Lady through this powerful devotion. What you don't realize is that these seemingly minor mistakes are actually spiritual barriers, preventing you from experiencing the miraculous intervention that has transformed thousands of lives worldwide. The difference between merely saying the Rosary and praying it with power is as vast as the difference between reading about swimming and being immersed in the ocean's depths. Before revealing this secret that has transformed the lives of thousands of faithful souls, you must understand something profoundly important about Padre Pio's teaching. This humble Capuchin monk, whose hands bled with the wounds of Christ for over 50 years, possessed an extraordinary connection to heaven that few saints have ever achieved. When he spoke about the Rosary, he wasn't simply sharing a personal opinion. He was revealing mystical insights granted directly through his intimate conversations with the Virgin Mary herself. Padre Pio often said, "The Rosary is the weapon for these times." But he wept over how many souls were wielding this spiritual sword incorrectly, cutting themselves off from divine protection rather than defeating the enemy. The transformation awaiting you isn't a distant possibility, but an immediate promise, if you approach this devotion correctly. Padre Pio's guidance reveals not just how to pray, but how to ensure heaven hears and responds to your petitions with unexpected graces that will leave you in awe of God's generosity. These aren't just pious words or religious platitudes. They are tested spiritual principles that have brought about miraculous healings, profound conversions, and seemingly impossible solutions to countless devotees who discovered how to avoid the 5 critical mistakes most Catholics make when praying the Rosary. Tonight, your relationship with this powerful prayer will be fundamentally transformed. The first critical mistake Padre Pio identified is praying mechanically, without heart involvement. You might recognize this in your own practice, those moments when your lips move automatically while your mind wanders through shopping lists, work concerns, or family matters. This mechanical recitation transforms what should be a loving conversation with the Queen of Heaven into nothing more than spiritual background noise. When you say your Rosary, Padre Pio instructed, the words should not come only from your lips, but from your heart. Think of it this way. If your dearest friend called you on the phone and you responded with pre-recorded messages while focusing on other activities, how meaningful would that relationship remain? This is precisely what happens when we reduce the Rosary to a thoughtless routine. The spiritual muscles of attention and devotion must be exercised deliberately each time you take up your beads. Padre Pio taught that even a single Hail Mary prayed with complete attention and love carries more spiritual power than an entire Rosary recited distractedly. When you truly engage your heart, something miraculous happens. The thin veil between heaven and earth becomes nearly transparent. The Virgin Mary doesn't simply hear your words, she experiences your presence. This is why Padre Pio would often spend hours on a single decade, lost in the spiritual conversation that transcended mere words. He revealed to his spiritual children that the angels gather around a soul who prays the Rosary with genuine devotion, amplifying each prayer and carrying it directly to the throne of God with special urgency. To overcome this first mistake, begin by creating a sacred space, both physically and mentally, before you start praying. Light a candle, place a sacred image before you, and take 3 deep breaths while consciously inviting your guardian angel to help maintain your focus. When distractions inevitably arise, don't become frustrated or discouraged. Simply acknowledge them and gently return your attention to the prayer. Padre Pio suggested visualizing each Hail Mary as a beautiful rose you're presenting to Our Lady, focusing on making each one perfect rather than rushing to complete a specific number. The Rosary, he said, should mark the rhythm of your life, not be checked off your spiritual to-do list. When you approach the Rosary this way, you'll begin to feel a warmth in your soul, a subtle but unmistakable sign that your prayers are truly being received. The second mistake that blocks unexpected graces is failing to meditate on the mysteries. You see, many approach the Rosary as merely a series of vocal prayers, completely overlooking that it's primarily a meditation on the life of Christ through Mary's eyes. Padre Pio explained this oversight by saying, "Praying the Rosary without meditating on the mysteries is like presenting someone with a beautiful rose bush that has no flowers. The true power of the Rosary lies not in the repetition of words, but in allowing your heart to enter into these sacred scenes, walking alongside Mary as she receives the angel's message, feeling the cold straw of the manger in Bethlehem, experiencing the agonizing weight of the cross on the way to Calvary. When you neglect this essential component, you're essentially reading Scripture without understanding its meaning, or worse, having a conversation where you speak but never listen to the divine whispers responding to your heart." This meditative dimension transforms the Rosary from a devotional practice into a mystical experience. Padre Pio often found himself visibly transported during his Rosary prayers, sometimes physically present in the biblical scenes he contemplated. While such mystical gifts are rare, he insisted that every faithful soul can experience a genuine spiritual transportation through proper meditation. The mysteries of the Rosary, he taught, are windows through which the soul can enter into direct contact with the divine realities that shaped our salvation. Each mystery contains infinite spiritual wisdom that, when properly contemplated, imprints itself upon your soul and gradually transforms you into the image of Christ that Mary herself desires to form within you. This transformative power remains locked away when prayers are rushed through without contemplation. To apply this teaching, before beginning each decade, take a moment to clearly visualize the corresponding mystery. See the colors, hear the sounds, feel the emotions of those present. Ask Mary to share her perspective of these events with you. As you recite the prayers, keep this scene alive in your heart, allowing new insights to emerge naturally. Don't worry about having profound theological thoughts. Simply be present in the mystery with childlike attention. If you struggle with visualization, Padre Pio recommended using sacred artwork or reading a short scripture passage related to the mystery before beginning the decade. If you truly wish to experience the transformative power of this teaching, type in the comments, "I am ready to receive these unexpected graces through proper meditation." Your commitment will be the first step toward a profound spiritual renewal through this ancient devotion. The third critical mistake Padre Pio warned against is constantly interrupting the Rosary or spreading it throughout the day without good reason. While the Church allows for this flexibility when necessary, Padre Pio observed that the spiritual power of the Rosary diminishes significantly when it's fragmented without legitimate cause. You might recognize this pattern in your own devotion, starting a decade in the morning, continuing during lunch break, and finishing before bed, or pausing frequently to check your phone, adjust the television, or attend to minor distractions that could easily wait. The Rosary, Padre Pio explained, is like a symphony of prayer. When you constantly interrupt it, you lose the harmony that touches heaven. This continuous flow creates a spiritual momentum that builds with each prayer, creating a powerful channel of grace that interruptions disrupt. The science of spiritual attention reveals why this continuity matters so deeply. When you maintain focused prayer for an extended period, your soul enters progressively deeper states of communion with the divine. Neurologically speaking, your brain transitions from beta waves, normal waking consciousness, to alpha waves, relaxed awareness, and potentially even theta waves, deep meditation, states where spiritual receptivity dramatically increases. Padre Pio understood this principle intuitively through his mystical experiences. When you pray the Rosary without unnecessary breaks, he taught, you create a sacred bubble of prayer that repels evil influences and creates space for miraculous intervention. This protective spiritual field weakens with each interruption, requiring significant energy to re-establish. To implement this wisdom, set aside a specific time each day dedicated solely to praying the Rosary without interruption. Turn off notifications, inform family members not to disturb you, and create boundaries around this sacred time. If legitimate responsibilities make a complete Rosary impossible, Padre Pio suggested praying fewer decades with complete attention, rather than the full 20 mysteries with constant interruptions. God values quality over quantity, he reminded his spiritual children. If an unavoidable interruption occurs, make a brief spiritual act of regathering your intention before continuing. Consider this uninterrupted time as a sacred appointment with the Queen of Heaven, one that deserves at least the same respect you would give to an important business meeting or medical appointment. Your faithfulness to this practice will gradually strengthen your spiritual muscles of attention. The fourth mistake that prevents unexpected graces is praying without a clear intention. You may have fallen into this pattern without realizing it, beginning the Rosary without specifically dedicating it to a particular need, personal spiritual goal. Padre Pio compared this to firing an arrow without aiming at a target. The prayer has power, but lacks direction. Every Rosary, he insisted, should be offered as a spiritual bouquet for a specific intention that lies heavily on your heart. This doesn't mean your prayers become selfish. Rather, they become focused. The Blessed Mother, who understands the complexities of human needs better than we ever could, receives these specifically directed prayers with special attention, knowing exactly where to apply the graces they generate. Without this clarity of purpose, the spiritual energy of your prayer disperses rather than concentrates on breaking through specific spiritual obstacles. This principle of intentionality creates a powerful spiritual dynamic. When you clearly articulate your intention, whether for physical healing, spiritual conversion, guidance in a decision, or protection during difficulty, you activate your faith in a specific direction. Faith, as Padre Pio often taught, is the spiritual conductor that allows divine power to flow into human circumstances. A Rosary offered with clear intention and absolute faith, he said, can move mountains that seem immovable to human capacity. He frequently told the story of a mother who prayed the Rosary daily for 27 years for her son's conversion, maintaining the same specific intention without wavering. On the day of Padre Pio's funeral, that son, now an elderly man, experienced a profound conversion while standing near the saint's coffin, later revealing that he felt the culmination of countless rosaries washing over his soul in that moment. To apply this teaching effectively, before beginning your Rosary, take a moment of silence to formulate your specific intention. Padre Pio recommended writing it down and placing it visibly near you as you pray. Be precise rather than general, not simply for world peace, but for peace in my family relationship with specific person. Not merely for health, but for courage and healing during my upcoming medical treatment. Periodically throughout the Rosary, especially between decades, gently bring this intention back to mind, visualizing the grace already beginning to manifest. Conclude your prayer by explicitly entrusting this intention to Mary's intercession, confident that she has received your spiritual bouquet and will apply its graces exactly where needed. This practice transforms abstract devotion into a targeted spiritual intervention with remarkable efficacy. The fifth crucial mistake Padre Pio identified is praying with impurity of heart or in a state of serious sin without seeking reconciliation. This teaching may challenge modern sensibilities that prefer to separate spirituality from moral considerations, but Padre Pio was uncompromising on this point. The Rosary, he explained, is like a telephone line to heaven. Sin places static on the line that distorts the communication. This doesn't mean you must be perfect to pray effectively, quite the opposite. The Rosary is medicine for sinners, not a reward for the saints. However, Padre Pio emphasized that praying while deliberately clinging to serious sin creates a spiritual contradiction that limits the prayer's efficacy. It's like asking for help while simultaneously rejecting the helper's most basic requirements. The spiritual mechanism at work here relates to receptivity. Grace always flows abundantly from heaven, but our capacity to receive and channel this grace depends significantly on the state of our souls. Padre Pio compared it to pouring pure water into a dirty container. The water remains pure, but becomes contaminated by the vessel. Regular confession, he taught, cleanses the spiritual vessel of your soul, allowing the graces of the Rosary to remain pure and potent within you. This doesn't stem from divine pettiness, but from the natural laws of spiritual reality. Our Lady, in her appearances at Fatima and elsewhere, consistently emphasized this connection between moral purification and powerful prayer. Padre Pio noted that many spiritual blockages in prayer could be traced back to unaddressed sin, creating resistance in the soul. Resistance that often manifests as persistent distractions, emotional dryness, or a sense of distance from God during prayer. To implement this teaching with spiritual maturity, establish a regular practice of examination of conscience and confession. Before beginning the Rosary, take a brief moment to acknowledge any significant failures and make an act of contrition with the intention of seeking sacramental reconciliation when possible. This simple practice, far from being scrupulous, actually liberates the soul from the subtle guilt that often distracts during prayer. Padre Pio recommended monthly confession for most people, but also emphasized that the sincere desire for reconciliation already begins the healing process. A contrite heart, he said, already stands in the antechamber of grace, even before formal absolution. This balanced approach recognizes human weakness, while still honoring the importance of spiritual integrity in prayer. The resulting clarity of conscience creates a noticeable difference in the quality of your prayer experience. Many report feeling lighter, more focused, and more confident in God's loving response. When you integrate these 5 corrections into your Rosary devotion, you create the spiritual conditions for what Padre Pio called the cascade of unexpected graces. The first manifestation you'll likely experience is an unusual sense of peace that defies logical explanation. This isn't merely emotional calm, but what Padre Pio described as peace that stands guard over your thoughts and feelings even when external circumstances remain turbulent. Countless devotees have reported experiencing this profound tranquility within days of correcting these common mistakes, finding themselves mysteriously unshaken by the same triggers that previously caused anxiety or anger. This peace becomes a tangible sign that your properly prayed Rosary is already working, rewiring your spiritual nervous system to operate from divine stability rather than human reactivity. The second unexpected grace frequently reported is what Padre Pio called illumination of the intellect, a surprising clarity about decisions, relationships, and spiritual matters that previously seemed confusing. You might suddenly understand the root cause of a long-standing personal struggle, see a clear path forward in a complex situation, or gain insight into Scripture that transforms your understanding of God's will for your life. The Rosary properly prayed, Padre Pio explained, attunes the mind to heaven's frequency where divine wisdom becomes accessible to even the simplest souls. This intellectual illumination doesn't always arrive as dramatic revelations. More often it manifests as a series of coincidences, conversations, readings, or observations that mysteriously align to provide exact guidance for your specific needs. Many have reported opening books to precisely the page containing the answer they sought, or receiving phone calls from people unknowingly offering the exact counsel needed. The third and perhaps most dramatic category of unexpected graces involves tangible interventions in seemingly impossible situations. Padre Pio documented numerous cases of terminal illnesses suddenly reversing, financial crises resolving through unforeseen provision, and long-estranged relationships healing after years of hostility, all following proper Rosary devotion. One particularly striking case involved a young mother in Padre Pio's parish who had been told her unborn child had fatal complications, with doctors recommending immediate termination. After correcting these 5 mistakes in her daily Rosary, she returned for follow-up tests to find doctors baffled by the complete disappearance of the previously documented abnormalities. The properly prayed Rosary Padre Pio insisted, permits Mary to exercise her maternal influence over situations that appear beyond human remedy. While such dramatic interventions aren't guaranteed, they occur with remarkable frequency when the Rosary is approached with the spiritual integrity these 5 corrections establish. Your journey toward experiencing these unexpected graces requires patience and perseverance, as spiritual habits aren't transformed overnight. Padre Pio compared this process to athletic training. The soul that begins correcting these mistakes will initially feel the strain of spiritual muscles long unused, but persistence quickly builds supernatural stamina. During the first weeks, you may actually experience increased distractions, emotional dryness, or even unusual obstacles that mysteriously arise during your prayer time. Recognize these as what spiritual directors call purification challenges, the natural resistance that occurs when significant spiritual growth begins. The enemy, Padre Pio warned, becomes most aggressive precisely when your prayers begin to gain true effectiveness. Rather than discouraging you, these challenges should confirm you're moving in the right direction, prompting spiritual forces that prefer you remain in ineffective prayer patterns to actively oppose your progress. The development of proper rosary devotion follows a pattern Padre Pio described to his spiritual children. The first phase involves conscious effort and frequent failures as you work to establish new spiritual habits. During this period, which typically lasts 3 to 4 weeks, your prayer may actually feel more difficult than before. The second phase brings increasing moments of genuine spiritual connection interspersed with periods of continued struggle. This middle ground, lasting anywhere from 1 to 3 months, requires particular perseverance as progress becomes evident but inconsistent. The third phase marks the establishment of new spiritual pathways in which proper rosary prayer becomes your natural default. At this stage, Padre Pio explained, the soul begins to be prayed through rather than struggling to pray. Mary herself guides the meditation, while the soul rests in receptive attention. This mature stage of devotion doesn't eliminate all challenges but transforms them into opportunities for deeper surrender. To sustain your commitment through these phases, Padre Pio recommended 3 specific supports. First, find accountability through sharing your intention with at least one person who will regularly ask about your progress. Second, document your experiences in a spiritual journal, recording both challenges and graces to maintain perspective during difficult periods. Third, anchor your practice in physical consistency, using the same prayer space, time of day, and even physical posture whenever possible to train your body and mind through environmental cues. The flesh, Padre Pio taught, can become either a hindrance or a help to prayer, depending on whether we train it to serve spiritual purposes. As you implement these supports, remember that what you're cultivating isn't merely a devotional practice, but a living relationship with Mary, and through her, with Christ. This relational perspective transforms discipline from burdensome obligation into loving commitment that sustains motivation through inevitable difficulties. The moment. To begin this transformed relationship with the Rosary isn't tomorrow or next week, but today, this very night before you sleep. Padre Pio often told the story of a woman who postponed implementing these corrections for a more convenient season, only to suffer a serious accident the very next day. During her lengthy recovery, she repeatedly told Padre Pio, "If only I had begun when first instructed, how different my circumstances might now be." Spiritual procrastination stems from the enemy's awareness that delayed obedience often becomes permanent neglect. The soul that postpones spiritual commitment, Padre Pio warned, hands victory to the adversary without any struggle. The Rosary. Properly prayed creates a protective spiritual field that many have reported literally prevents accidents, inspires life-saving decisions, and diverts harm in ways only recognized in retrospect. This protection extends not only to you, but to those connected with you, creating ripples of grace that affect families, workplaces, and communities. Your decision to implement these corrections carries eternal significance beyond the immediate graces promised. Padre Pio, who was granted mystical insight into the spiritual realm, frequently described seeing the souls of the deceased helped or hindered in their purification based on the quality of rosaries offered for them by the living. A single rosary, properly prayed, he insisted, accomplishes more for a departed soul than dozens rushed through without heart or meditation. This eternal perspective extends to the living as well. The spiritual DNA of your prayer life creates inheritance patterns that unconsciously influence children, grandchildren, and others who observe your devotion. Numerous spiritual directors have documented how the prayer patterns of one individual often manifest generations later in descendants who never consciously witnessed them. When you pray the rosary properly, Padre Pio taught, you establish spiritual territory for your lineage that remains accessible to them even when cultural forces oppose faith. The ultimate unexpected grace awaiting you through properly prayed. Rosaries is nothing less than accelerated conformity to Christ himself, the true goal of all authentic spirituality. As you faithfully implement these corrections, you'll begin noticing subtle changes in your reactions, priorities, and perspectives that reflect more of Christ's character and less of your natural tendencies. Difficult people become opportunities for compassion rather than sources of frustration. Material possessions lose their grip on your affections. Fear of future uncertainties dissolves into confident trust. These character transformations represent the deepest work of the Rosary, what Padre Pio called Mary's master craftsmanship in sculpting souls to reflect her Son. The mysterious alchemy of properly prayed rosaries gradually transmutes the lead of human weakness into the gold of divine virtue, not through self-improvement techniques, but through genuine participation in divine life. The soul faithful to proper rosary devotion, Padre Pio promised, need not worry about its spiritual progress, for Mary herself takes responsibility for its transformation. Begin tonight with even 1 decade prayed according to these corrections, and you'll take the first step on this extraordinary journey of unexpected graces.